In the dying light of World War II, when Europe trembled under the thunder of guns and the sky itself seemed to burn, there was one American unit whose battlefield looked nothing like the rest. They carried no heavy artillery, commanded no tanks made of steel, and rarely fired a shot. Their mission was stranger, riskier, and though few realized it, utterly essential. They were artists, actors, designers, and sound engineers turned soldiers. Their job was to deceive the Nazis, to make the enemy believe in an army that didn't exist. History remembers them now as the Ghost Army. Their story begins not in the mud of France, but in art schools, design studios, and advertising offices across the United States. In 1943, while the Allied High Command was planning how to take Europe back from Hitler, a handful of officers inside U.S. Army intelligence began thinking about deception. Britain already had Operation Fortitude, a vast bluff built from fake camps and double agents. The Americans wanted something even bolder, a portable illusion they could move anywhere the real army went. So the War Department quietly assembled an experimental unit, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. Recruiters didn't look for sharpshooters. They scouted art departments. Young painters, architects, and set designers suddenly found themselves handed draft papers marked top secret. Among them were future luminaries, Bill Blass, who would later shape American fashion, and Ellsworth Kelly, who would redefine modern art. In uniform they carried sketchbooks instead of carbines, and were told simply, "Your job is to fool the Germans." Training began at Camp Forest, Tennessee. The men learned camouflage, radio procedure, and the physics of sound. They practiced inflating life-size rubber tanks until they looked convincing under a low sun. They studied how tire tracks curved when heavy armor rolled through mud. Engineers from Bell Labs arrived with mobile sound systems capable of projecting recorded noise 10 miles. When the trainees switched them on, the ground shook as if a division of Shermans were grinding past. To the men who built these illusions, the line between art and war blurred completely. By the spring of 1944, their skills were tested in the field. The unit, just 1,100 soldiers, could impersonate an entire corps of 30,000. Its arsenal of deception came in three forms: visual, sonic, and radio. The visual team handled the inflatables, tanks of rubber, jeeps of canvas, artillery that could be lifted by 2 men. The sonic team operated giant speakers, mixing recordings of engines, explosions, and shouted commands to mimic any military movement. The radio operators filled the air with fake transmissions, repeating real call signs, imitating authentic personalities, and creating a convincing web of chatter. When all three worked together, the illusion was almost impossible to detect. Then came D-Day. On June 6, 1944, as Allied troops stormed Normandy's beaches, the Ghost Army waited in England, ready for deployment once the front stabilized. Weeks later, they crossed the Channel and stepped into the chaos of France. Normandy's fields were still smoking, villages shattered, but their strange cargo of rubber and wires drew curious stares from everyone who saw it. At night, they set up their first mock encampment near St. Lo. By dawn, reconnaissance planes could see what looked like an armored column, rows of tanks, supply trucks, even laundry lines fluttering beside tents. The trick worked. German intelligence reported a strong mechanized force in the area, diverting artillery that might have devastated real troops elsewhere. That success marked the beginning of a campaign of illusions that would last until the war's end. Each operation followed the same rhythm: arrive quietly, build an army out of air and canvas, broadcast the sounds of war, send false radio messages, then vanish before daylight revealed the truth. The ghosts could stage the arrival of a full division overnight and disappear just as fast. Local villagers watched in disbelief as hundreds of tanks materialized one evening and were gone by morning. "You Americans," one farmer whispered, "you make war like magicians." The unit's second great test came in August 1944, during the battle for the French port of Brest. The Germans were dug in. The Allies needed to outflank them. The Ghost Army deployed nearby, posing as the 6th Armored Division. They inflated tanks across open fields, painted decoy roads on the ground, and blasted the roar of engines through forests. To any German scout, it looked and sounded like Patton's armor preparing to strike. Enemy units rushed to reinforce Brest, leaving other sectors exposed. The real American divisions advanced through those gaps with minimal resistance. The deception worked so perfectly that captured German officers, later swore they had fought entire regiments that never existed. Still, life in the Ghost Army was dangerous. Their operations often placed them within a few miles of the front, sometimes inside artillery range. They carried only rifles for show. If the enemy discovered the ruse, they would have been slaughtered. Nights were spent crouched in muddy fields, inflating rubber armor by hand while the horizon flashed with gunfire. The men joked about being the biggest target on the continent made of air, yet they never stopped working. Every inflatable tank they raised was another shield for real soldiers somewhere else. Through the autumn of 1944, the Ghosts shadowed Patton's advance across France. Patton, famous for speed and audacity, understood the value of deception. He called the unit his traveling circus. Whenever the Germans thought they had pinned down his location, the Ghost Army was often nearby, broadcasting fake radio, traffic, and rolling their rubber convoys through open fields. Enemy intercepts soon concluded that Patton commanded far more troops than he actually did. Confusion turned into paralysis. December brought the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's final gamble. Snow fell thick over the Ardennes. Allied lines buckled under surprise attack. Amid the chaos, the Ghost Army was thrown into the fray again, ordered to simulate reinforcements along a crumbling front. They hauled their inflatables through ice, painting them white for camouflage. Loudspeakers rumbled with the sound of tanks forming up. Engines revving, men shouting over wind. The deception stalled the enemy, just long enough for exhausted real units to regroup. One veteran remembered, "It felt like standing in front of a hurricane with an umbrella, but that umbrella held." Not every mission succeeded flawlessly. On several occasions, German patrols wandered too close, discovering half-inflated vehicles and footprints where a division supposedly stood. Yet even when exposed, the psychological fog worked in the Allies' favor. German commanders began doubting every report they received. Was that a real division or another American trick? Suspicion itself became a weapon. By February 1945, the war was racing toward its conclusion. The Allied armies had reached the Rhine, the last great natural barrier before Germany's industrial heartland. Commanders feared that crossing it would be costly. Once more, deception offered a solution. The Ghost Army's final and greatest performance would become a masterpiece of misdirection. Their task was to make the enemy believe the main crossing would occur near Wesel, far north of the real target. Over 2 weeks, the unit staged a phantom army along 30 miles of riverbank. They erected hundreds of inflatable tanks and trucks, arranged to catch sunlight just right for aerial reconnaissance. Engineers laid dummy pontoon bridges halfway into the water. At night, powerful speakers blasted the creak of boats, shouted orders and the splash of oars. Radio men sent fake transmissions about fuel shortages and bridge repairs. From the German side, the evidence was overwhelming. A major assault seemed imminent. On the night of March 23, 1945, the real crossing, Operation Plunder, took place 60 miles south. British and American forces stormed the Rhine with surprisingly light opposition. The decoy at Wesel had drawn enemy artillery and reserves away. For the Ghost Army, it was a triumph years in the making. Their illusions had once again turned air and imagination into victory. When Germany finally surrendered that May, the world celebrated the soldiers who had fought their way from Normandy to Berlin. But the men of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops marched quietly home. Their work was classified, their very existence erased from official history. They were forbidden to talk about what they had done. For decades, families and friends knew only that they had served in Europe. The truth stayed hidden behind locked files marked top secret. In peacetime, the Ghosts returned to art. Bill Blass built a fashion empire. Ellsworth Kelly filled galleries with color and form. Others became architects, teachers, designers. When they painted or sculpted, perhaps they remembered nights under foreign skies, the hiss of air compressors inflating rubber armor, the thrill of creating something that could save lives. Their brushes had once been weapons, their creativity a shield. Half a century passed before their secret emerged. In 1996, declassified records and photographs revealed the full story. Historians were stunned. Here was an entire American army that had fought with illusion, not firepower. Veterans, now gray-haired, finally spoke about their strange war. They described the smell of canvas and paint, the adrenaline of hearing artillery while pretending to be a target, The satisfaction of outwitting an enemy who never even knew they were there. "We didn't kill anyone," one said quietly, "but we helped win." Public recognition followed slowly. Documentaries and exhibitions showcased their art and ingenuity. In 2022, the U.S. Congress awarded the surviving members the Congressional Gold Medal, one of the nation's highest honors. Fewer than 20 were still alive to receive it. Standing before lawmakers, they looked small and humble, but their legacy loomed large. "We were just kids doing what we were trained to do," one veteran told reporters. "Only later did we realize how much it mattered." Today, military academies study their techniques as early examples of psychological operations and information warfare. The tools have evolved: satellites, digital decoys, cyber deception, but the philosophy remains the same. Control what the enemy sees, and you control the battle. Every time modern forces project false movements or spoof radar images, they echo the ghosts who once inflated tanks in the moonlight. The Ghost Army proved something profound about human imagination. In a war defined by destruction, they created instead of destroying. Their courage lay not in firing weapons, but in daring to stand close to danger, armed only with creativity. They showed that art can protect, that illusion can serve truth, that a painted shadow can save a life. Their work reminds us that victory isn't always about strength. It's about vision. Picture it one last time. A dark French field in 1944. The air smells of rain and gasoline. A small group of men crouch beside a flat shape of canvas. An air compressor hums. Slowly the figure rises, a tank gleaming under the moon. Perfect except for its silence. Far away, German observers peer through binoculars and scribble notes. "American armor moving north," they report. But in that quiet field, the artists smile. The trick has worked again. Tomorrow, real soldiers will move safely because of this lie. The engines of deception fade into history, but their echo remains, a whisper of rubber and courage, of paint and peril. The Ghost Army marched on imagination and left behind a lesson for every generation. Even in the darkest war, creativity can be a weapon, and the sharpest blade is sometimes an idea. They were the soldiers who fought with art, the heroes who never fired a shot, the ghosts who fooled Hitler and helped end the greatest conflict the world has ever known.